The thunder that split the Wyoming sky that October evening would change everything. But Samuel Morrison didn't know that yet as he stood on his porch, watching lightning dance across the endless prairie. What he saw next made his weathered hands tighten around his coffee mug. A figure stumbled through the rain, moving like a wounded animal, barely visible through the sheets of water cascading from the darkened heavens. In 30 seconds, this moment would shatter the solitude he'd carefully built around himself for the past 15 years. The wind howled like the ghosts of his past, driving rain against the windows of his modest ranch house. Sam squinted through the storm, his 60-year-old eyes straining to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure collapsed just 50 yards from his front gate, swallowed by the tall grass that bent and swayed in the violent weather. Without thinking, he grabbed his worn leather jacket and pushed through the screen door into the tempest. The rain hit him like icy needles, soaking through his clothes before he'd taken 10 steps. His boots squelched in the mud as he fought his way toward the spot where the figure had fallen. The storm seemed determined to keep him back, wind pushing against him with relentless force. But Sam Morrison had faced worse than weather in his lifetime. He'd survived tours in Vietnam, the death of his wife Margaret, and the slow exodus of neighbors who'd given up on ranch life. A thunderstorm wouldn't stop him now. When he reached the collapsed figure, his breath caught in his throat. It was a young woman, maybe 20, with long black hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her clothes were torn and muddy, and even in the darkness, he could see the dark stain of blood spreading across her left shoulder. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. But what struck him most was her face, peaceful despite her obvious pain, with the distinct features that told him she was Native American. Sam didn't hesitate. He'd learned long ago that some moments demanded action, not questions. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. She couldn't weigh more than 110 pounds. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her toward the house, rain continuing to assault them both. Each step was deliberate, mindful of her injuries, mindful of the trust she couldn't give, but he was taking anyway. Inside the warmth of his home, Sam laid her gently on the couch near the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across her features, highlighting the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. He fetched towels and his basic first aid kit, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd tended wounds before. The bullet had grazed her shoulder, leaving an angry red furrow, but thankfully not lodging in the muscle. He cleaned and bandaged the wound with gentle hands, working by lamplight while the storm raged outside. She stirred as he finished, dark eyes fluttering open to meet his. Fear flickered there for just a moment before something else took its place. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the understanding that she was safe. She tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandages. "Easy there," Sam said softly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to calming frightened animals. "You're hurt. Just rest." She studied his face for a long moment, those dark eyes taking in every detail. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, rough from pain and exhaustion. Why? It was a simple question that carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of mistrust. Sam understood. He'd seen enough of the world to know that kindness between strangers, especially across cultural lines, was rare in these parts. "Because you needed help," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Something shifted in her expression. She nodded once, a gesture of acceptance that felt like a bridge being built. Sam stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a steaming mug of coffee, black and strong, the way he'd been drinking it for 40 years. "Drink this," he said, helping her sit up enough to hold the cup. "It'll warm you up." She wrapped her fingers around the ceramic mug, drawing heat from it before taking a tentative sip. The coffee seemed to bring color back to her cheeks, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked truly alive. Outside, the storm began to ease, but neither of them knew that by morning, the sky would tell a different story entirely. dawn broke across the Wyoming plains with a clarity that only followed the fiercest storms. Sam Morrison woke in his recliner where he'd spent the night, keeping watch over his unexpected guest. The young woman still slept on the couch, her breathing steady and peaceful now. The fireplace had burned down to glowing embers, but the morning, sun streaming through the windows, brought warmth that chased away the last shadows of the stormy night. Sam stretched his stiff joints and padded quietly to the kitchen to start fresh coffee. The familiar ritual grounded him, the rich aroma filling the small space as he tried to process what had happened. In 15 years of solitary living, no one had knocked on his door, much less collapsed on his property. Margaret used to say, he had a gift for finding strays, but this felt different. This felt like something larger than chance. A soft movement from the living room caught his attention. The young woman was awake, sitting up carefully and testing the range of motion in her injured shoulder. She'd managed to braid her long black hair during the night, and in the morning light, Sam could see she was younger than he'd initially thought. Maybe 18 or 19, with the kind of quiet strength that reminded him of the wild horses that sometimes wandered onto his land. "Coffee's ready," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned toward his voice and he saw something he hadn't noticed in the lamplight. Her eyes held an intelligence that seemed to measure and catalogue everything around her. When she stood, moving with careful grace despite her injury, Sam noticed she was taller than he'd realized, probably 5'6", with the lean build of someone accustomed to covering long distances on foot. "Thank you," she said, accepting the steaming mug he offered. Her voice was clearer now, carrying a slight accent that spoke of English learned alongside another language. "I should tell you my name. I'm Ayanna, Sam Morrison," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "And you don't owe me explanations." Ayanna studied him over the rim of her coffee cup, those dark eyes seeming to look right through him. "Most people would ask questions. Most people haven't learned when to keep their mouths shut." Something that might have been a smile flickered across her features. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee while the morning light grew stronger. Sam found himself watching her hands wrapped around the ceramic mug, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the subtle tension that suggested she was still ready to run if necessary. It was Ayanna who first noticed something was wrong. She'd moved to the window, drawn by the growing brightness of the day, when her entire body went rigid. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. "What is it?" Sam asked, rising quickly. Ayanna didn't answer. She pressed her face to the glass, her breathing rapid and shallow. Sam joined her at the window and felt his own breath catch. Rising from the horizon in multiple directions were thin columns of smoke, perfectly straight and evenly spaced. Not the chaotic black smoke of wildfires or accidents, but deliberate white smoke that spoke of controlled burns and intentional signals. "How many?" Ayanna whispered. Sam counted quickly, his old eyes straining against the distance. 8, maybe 9, all around us like we're in the center of a circle. Ayanna stepped back from the window, her face pale beneath her tan skin. "They found me." "Who found you?" But before she could answer, more smoke appeared, this time closer, rising from the ridgeline that bordered Sam's property to the north, then another to the south and another to the east. Within minutes, smoke signals surrounded the ranch house completely, a perfect circle of communication that spoke of coordination and numbers that made Sam's throat go dry. "Ayanna," he said carefully, "what did you do?" She turned to face him, and in her eyes, Sam saw something that chilled him to the bone. Not fear, but resignation, the look of someone who'd been running for a long time and had finally run out of places to hide. "I survived," she said simply. Outside, the smoke signals continued to rise, and Sam Morrison realized that his quiet life on the Wyoming plains was about to become something else entirely. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but he didn't notice. All his attention was fixed on the horizon and the growing certainty that whatever was coming, There would be no running from it. The morning that had started with such peaceful clarity now held the promise of something that would test everything he thought he knew about. Right and wrong, about loyalty and sacrifice, about what it meant to offer sanctuary to a stranger. The sound of hoofbeats reached them first, a low rumble that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Sam Morrison stood at his kitchen window, watching the dust clouds approach from 3 different directions, each one marking the path of riders converging on his property. Beside him, Ayanna had gone completely still, her injured shoulder forgotten as she watched her past catch up with her. "How many men are you worth?" Sam asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the approaching riders. "I'm not worth any men dying," Ayanna replied, her voice steady despite the tremor Sam could see in her hands. "But I'm the only one who witnessed what happened at Pine Ridge 2 weeks ago." Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach. Pine Ridge. He'd heard whispers in town, fragments of stories about a confrontation between tribal police and federal agents that had gone wrong. But like most white ranchers in the area, he'd assumed it was just another dispute over jurisdiction that would blow over with time. "What did you see?" Ayanna moved away from the window, her movements careful and deliberate. Agent Marcus Webb shooting an unarmed teenager in the back, then planting a weapon on the body. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. Agent Webb was well known in the county, a federal officer who'd been assigned to the reservation for the past 3 years. Sam had met him a few times in town, found him to be the kind of man who spoke too loudly and smiled too little. But murder? You're sure? I was maybe 30 feet away, hidden in the brush. I saw everything. Heard him tell his partner they'd say the boy was reaching for a gun. Ayanna's voice carried a weight that spoke of sleepless nights and the burden of terrible knowledge. When I tried to run, they saw me. Webb put a bullet through my shoulder. But I got away. Outside, the hoofbeats were getting closer. Sam could make out individual riders now, at least a dozen men approaching from the north, more from the east and south. They moved with the coordination of a military unit, spreading out to surround the ranch house completely. "Federal agents?" Sam asked. "Some. Others are local law enforcement. Webb has friends in the sheriff's department." Ayanna looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to hold too much pain for someone so young. "He'll kill me to keep me quiet." "Then he'll kill you for helping me." Sam Morrison had faced death before. In the jungles of Vietnam, in emergency rooms when Margaret's cancer fought its final battle, in the long nights when grief threatened to swallow him whole. But this felt different. This was a choice between his comfortable solitude and doing what he knew was right. "Well," he said, checking the load in his old hunting rifle, "I reckon that makes this interesting." The first group of riders came to a stop about 50 yards from the house, far enough to avoid easy rifle range, but close enough to make their presence felt. Sam could see Agent Webb among them, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Beside him rode Sheriff Dalton, a man Sam had voted for twice and was now beginning to regret. Webb's voice carried clearly across the morning air when he shouted toward the house, "Samuel Morrison, we know you have the girl. Send her out and nobody gets hurt." Sam stepped onto his front porch, his rifle cradled casually in his arms. Behind him, Ayanna stood in the doorway, visible but protected by the solid wood frame of the house. "Morning, Agent Webb," Sam called back. "Nice day for a ride, isn't it?" "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Morrison. The girl is wanted for questioning in connection with a federal investigation. Hand her over." "Questioning?" Sam's voice carried a note of skepticism that seemed to travel on the wind. "That the kind of questioning that leaves folks too dead to answer?" A murmur went through the assembled riders. Sam could see some of them exchanging glances, uncertainty creeping into their formations. These were local boys, most of them men, who'd grown up knowing the difference between right and wrong, even if they didn't always choose right. "Last chance, Morrison," Webb called, his voice harder now. "Send out the girl or we come in and get her." Sam looked back at Ayanna, seeing in her face the same determination he'd once carried through the rice paddies of Southeast Asia. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to hide. Whatever happened next, she was going to face it standing up. "Agent Webb," Sam called back, his voice carrying across the plains with the authority of a man who'd found his line in the sand. "You want her? You come through. Me." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sam could feel the weight of every decision that had led him to this moment. The young woman behind him, the men in front of him, and somewhere in between, the truth that was worth fighting for. In the distance, the smoke signals continued to rise, and Sam Morrison realized that some battles choose you, whether you're ready for them or not. The standoff stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Sam Morrison kept his rifle ready but not raised, understanding that the next few moments would determine whether this ended in justice or bloodshed. Behind him, Ayanna stood silent and strong, no longer the wounded girl he'd found in the storm, but a young woman prepared to face the consequences of speaking truth to power. That's when Sam heard it, a new sound beneath the tension, distant but growing stronger. More hoofbeats, but these came from the west, from the direction of the reservation. Agent Webb heard it too, his head turning toward the approaching sound with something that looked like genuine concern crossing his granite features. "Expecting more company?" Sam called out, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. The smoke signals had not been a threat, they had been a summons. Over the ridge came a sight that would be burned into Sam Morrison's memory for the rest of his days. 40 riders, maybe 50, moving in perfect formation across the Wyoming plains. Native Americans, young and old, men and women, all riding toward his small ranch with the dignity and purpose of people who had traveled this land for generations. At their head rode an elderly man with silver hair braided with eagle feathers, his presence commanding even at a distance. "That's Joseph Crow Feather," Ayanna whispered, and Sam could hear the awe in her voice. "He's the tribal elder. If he's here, then everyone knows." Agent Webb's confident posture began to crack as the riders approached. Sam could see him speaking urgently into his radio, but whatever response he was getting clearly wasn't what he wanted to hear. The local sheriff's deputies were beginning to look uncomfortable, shifting in their saddles as they realized they were outnumbered 3-1. Joseph Crow Feather raised his hand, and every one of his riders stopped as if controlled by a single mind. The old man continued forward alone, his horse moving at a measured pace that spoke of ceremony rather than haste. When he was 20 feet from Agent Webb, he stopped and spoke in a voice that carried like wind across water. "Agent Webb, you have come onto sovereign land to silence a witness to murder. This is federal jurisdiction," Webb replied, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "The girl is wanted for questioning. The girl is under the protection of her people," Joseph said simply, "and her testimony has already been given." Webb's face went pale. "What do you mean?" Joseph Crow Feather reached into his jacket and withdrew a small digital recorder, holding it up so the morning sun caught its surface. "Last night, while you hunted one brave young woman, she was not alone. Modern technology, Agent Webb. Every word she spoke about what she witnessed at Pine Ridge was recorded and transmitted to the FBI field office in Denver, the Justice Department in Washington, and 3 major news networks. The silence that followed was deafening. Sam could see the exact moment when Webb realized his world was collapsing around him. The agent's hand moved toward his weapon, but Sheriff Dalton reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Don't make it worse than it already is, Marcus," Dalton said quietly. "She's lying," Webb snarled, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Joseph Crowfeather's weathered face showed the faintest hint of a smile. The smoke signals you saw this morning were not war signals, Agent Webb. They were signals of justice. Every tribal nation within 200 miles knows what you did. The evidence is already in the hands of people who cannot be bought or threatened. Sam. Morrison stepped down from his porch, still carrying his rifle, but feeling the tension begin to drain from the morning air. Ayanna moved beside him, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. "Seems to me," Sam said conversationally, "that makes this a different kind of morning than you were planning, Agent Webb." 2 hours later, Sam Morrison sat on his porch with Joseph Crow Feather, sharing coffee and watching federal vehicles disappear over the horizon. Agent Webb was in custody, facing charges that would likely end his career and his freedom. The other agents had been remarkably cooperative once they realized their colleague had gone rogue. "You didn't have to put yourself at risk for one of our people," Joseph said, his English carrying only the slightest accent despite his 70-plus years. "Wasn't about her being your people or my people," Sam replied. "Was about doing what's right." Ayanna emerged from the house, her shoulder properly treated by the tribal medic who'd arrived with Joseph's group. She carried a steaming mug of coffee and settled onto the porch steps between the two men. "The smoke signals," Sam said. "That was planned all along," Joseph nodded. "Ayanna made contact with us the night before the storm. We've been tracking Agent Webb's activities for months, waiting for the right moment to act. When she witnessed the murder, we knew we had our chance." "So you used me as bait," Sam said, but there was no anger in his voice. "We gave you a choice," Ayanna said softly. "You could have turned me away. Most people would have." Sam Morrison looked out across his land, watching the last of the federal vehicles disappear into the distance. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, unchanged by the morning's drama, eternal and patient as always. "Maybe," he said, "but then I would have missed the most interesting morning I've had in 15 years. Joseph Crow Feather laughed, a sound like wind through prairie grass. "Sam Morrison, you will always be welcome at our fires." As the sun climbed higher over Wyoming, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and green, Sam realized that his solitary life might not be so solitary anymore. Sometimes helping a stranger doesn't just change their world. Sometimes it changes yours, too. The smoke signals had long since faded from the horizon, but their message lingered. Justice, when it comes, rides on the wind and speaks in the language that all people understand. The language of doing what's right, no matter the cost. What an incredible journey we've just experienced together. If you loved this powerful story of courage, justice, and unexpected alliances in the American West, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another amazing tale. Drop a comment below and tell us what you thought about Sam Morrison's choice to protect Ayanna. Would you have made the same decision? What other historical stories would you like us to bring to life? Your support means everything to us, and every like, share, and comment helps us continue creating these immersive stories that celebrate the human spirit. Until next time, keep seeking the extraordinary in the everyday, and remember that sometimes the most powerful battles are fought not with weapons, but with the simple courage to do what's right.